Okay, I want to do a quick little video on some geographic and historical background that I thought you might find helpful as we get into John 4. I will try and do this more often because it's really good for me to dig into this and look into what's going on. So in John chapter 3, Jesus is in Jerusalem. He makes his way through Samaria. Now, usually, what's different about this is usually they wouldn't travel through Samaria. They would go around, usually off to the east through Jericho and then up to the Jordan Valley. But John chapter 4 makes a specific note that he had to go through Samaria. So, like, we aren't told why, but other than we have a divine meeting at the woman at the well. He followed what is known as the way of the patriarchs, and it's very ancient, goes all the way back to Abraham. When Abraham was called from Ur of the Chaldees, this is in Genesis 11:12. He comes in through the north, and then at Shechem, which is near where John chapter 4 takes place, he goes down the way of the patriarchs to Bethel and Ai, and then that's it's just a well-traveled road. And what it is it's a ridge system. So it's not there's not you're not traveling in the valley so much like you are on this side. There's another major road that went on this side. Joppa is where the modern city of Tel Aviv is today. And so this is the flatland that most people took when they were going from Egypt to the south up to Assyria in the north. But sort of this secondary road was the way of the patriarchs. So Abraham used it. And then here, this is showing that Jacob and Joseph both use it. You see the way of the patriarchs, Shechem, and connecting Shechem and Jerusalem. Even later, it became a pathway for the enemies of Judah used the way of the patriarchs to attack. So there you can see Shechem, and they're using that same road down to Jerusalem. So pretty famous road that Jesus took to meet his meet his woman at the well. It's about 40 miles, so it's not close, but few days journey. Certainly the most direct route to get from where he was going, where he left from Jerusalem, and then eventually he would. It says he needed to get back to Galilee, and that's the most direct route. Again, most of the time they would avoid the direct route and go around, and that's just because they didn't like each other and it wasn't safe. So towards the end of this presentation, I'll get into a little more about the differences between the Samaritans and the Jews, but really they really tried to avoid each other whenever possible. Verse 4 says he had to pass through Samaria. That's an interesting choice. This is just a picture of what the road would have looked like. So it's got some ridges, it's got some plateaus, and very nice country. So today this is in the modern West Bank. And unfortunately, a lot of the tourists don't go there because they're worried about safety and security and just almost similar reasons why you didn't use the road very much in Jesus' day. You don't use that same road today. It's just not considered safe. This is a modern view. So the woman is said to be from Sychar. Shechem is the more famous city, and then off to the side you can see Jacob's well, and then it all sits between Mount Gerizim and Mount Ebal. And if you remember, if you've learned from the Old Testament and the Torah, they are Israel before they come into the land. It says when you get there, you're going to one side's going to read the curses from Mount Ebal, and you're going to read the blessings from Mount Gerizim. And you can see that very easily. It could probably be heard if you had a few million people with split up on either side with a few in the valley there. What's interesting is Mount Ebal to this day is bare. I mean, you can see it in this picture, whereas Mount Gerizim, the Mount of Blessings, is fertile and there's trees and all that. So all that's kind of interesting. This is all the modern Arabic city of Nablus today, and not so much recently, but you may remember several years back, when the troubles were really at their height. You would hear just a lot of bad activity happening in Nablus. So unfortunately, a lot of that means that people don't get to visit it, even though it's just this area is just such rich with biblical history. Jacob's Well, it's now a church. There's a church built over it. The other thing that is referenced, and if you listen to the audio that I sent on Sunday morning, she makes a reference to Joseph's tomb. And so the audio thinks that there's a third witness, and that are the bones of Joseph that are in this same area. So Joseph is generally loosely considered to be the son of that led to the northern kingdom, whereas Judah, of course, is the son associated with the southern kingdom. So even way back, you had these tribes kind of, there's a rivalry building up, especially between Ephraim and Judah. Ephraim was the north and Judah was the south. So there's just kind of this territorialism, and started out as a rivalry and then became just flat out animosity by the time of Jesus' day. This is showing Genesis 33:19 in a Torah scroll. It says, and he bought the parcel of ground where he spread his tent at the hand of the children of Hamor, Shechem's father, for 100 pieces of money. So John chapter 4 verse 5 says he came to Sychar near the field that Jacob had given to his son Joseph. So it's all deeded. The story of Shechem is rather bloody in Genesis. Won't get into it here, but it's worth reading as additional background. This shows the distance between Sychar and where we believe the well is. It's about a half a mile, so not that far. Certainly not bad to travel any time of day, even if it's the video said the hottest time of the day is not the noon time. It's usually 3 o'clock, same as it is here in Texas. It's hotter in the afternoon, and we don't even know that the story took place in hot weather. So that's kind of it's a speculation. People tend to associate that, well, no one else would have gone out at that time, so she must have been a woman of ill repute and that kind of thing. So we're reading things into the text that really aren't there. We aren't told what time of year it was, or whether she was a prostitute or a loose morals or whatever. But again, you can see not that far. Just a view of the modern church from Jacob's Well, from Mount Gerizim. And then inside, very ornate. If you get a chance to travel there, you'll see a lot of the churches have what may be more comfortable for if you're Catholic, or if you're from the Eastern traditions, where you have this iconography, and ornate veneration and that kind of thing. Protestants are not as used to this, so it takes a bit of getting used to, but very much in keeping with church tradition. The Samaritans actually have a feast day for the woman at the well, and it is actually not the Samaritans. The church has a feast day. It falls on the 5th Sunday after Easter, and it's the Sunday of the Samaritan woman. And so on this day, pilgrims jam into this small room and try and get a little bit of the water. And it's very human. It's what we tend to do. We worship the object, we venerate the object, and lose sight of what happened there, and why the day becomes celebratory. The woman says, our fathers worshipped on this mountain. She's referring to Mount Gerizim. This is a picture taken around 1900 or 1920 in there, and not a large sect are Samaritans, but throughout history there's always been a group of Samaritans that have kept to their traditions, and most notably their Passover, which is different. They still celebrate that, whereas the Jews in Jerusalem can't celebrate it because there's no temple. Well, the Samaritans, they don't view themselves as having that restriction, so they continue to observe the Passover with the blood on the doorposts and the lamb and all that that's prescribed in Exodus. Kind of a wider shot showing the Jacob's Well there circled, and then the Samaritan temple up on top. There's also a Roman temple that was a little bit lower elevation too, but all that's on Mount Gerizim. Here's a shot from Mount Ebal, so we're kind of turned around again, looking at the remains of the Samaritan temple, and then you can see the Roman temple, and then the city in the valley below. Again, as I pointed out, this is a good picture too. You can see this is taken from Mount Ebal, and you can see it's dry and brown and not a whole lot of life, whereas Gerizim is fertile and symbolic of blessings. And so when she says, we worship on this mountain, she's referring to Mount Gerizim. And then in verse 21, Jesus says, the hour is coming where neither on this mountain nor in Jerusalem will you worship the Father. So he's talking about taking it to literally and figuratively taking it to the next level. More of a close-up picture of the Mount Gerizim temple. If you remember that black and white photo, you saw that building that was in both pictures there. Jesus says something interesting. He says in verse 22, you worship that which you do not know. So they have, the Samaritans have a different set of, they follow the 5 books of Moses mostly. There's some translation differences that they apply. They follow a lot of the same customs as Judaism, but it's just different enough that they view themselves as the true faith, and people in Jerusalem as the false faith, and people in Jerusalem, view them the same way. So the audio draws the comparison between Shia and Sunni Muslims very similar. It's not just that they have different beliefs. It's like, no, we view you as apostates, and you are, you are not following the way. You have fallen from the true faith, and we don't like you because of that. Again, they keep the Passover, which is interesting. If you're in that area, you can go see the full sacrifice of the lambs. It's a bit bloody compared to what we're used to and getting meat from our supermarkets, but still pretty interesting. I think that this group of people keeps those ancient traditions. Just some comparisons, if you find this helpful. The Samaritans are generally considered to be the 10 northern tribes, whereas the Jews are the 2 southern tribes. I have those in quotes and tribes in asterisks because it's easy to confuse geography with the actual movement of peoples. Basically, what happened after King Solomon passed away and there was the split between north and south, logically, if you lived in the north and you wanted to worship the God of the Jews in Jerusalem, you probably picked up and moved south, regardless of what tribe you were from. And the same way, if you were in Jerusalem and you didn't want to follow this and you wanted to go follow King Jeroboam and the idols and all that, you probably picked up and moved north. We know this because in the book of Acts, it's also commonly thought of that the northern tribes were lost, 10 lost tribes. You may have heard that term. That's actually not really true. They were assimilated by Assyria, and in the book of Acts, there's at least 2, and one of them is the tribe of Asher. It's a woman who says she's from the tribe of Asher, so obviously she's not lost by the time of Acts. And there's others too. So just 10 lost tribes is kind of a misnomer, and there's some silly traditions that go along with that. I wouldn't give that too much credence. The Samaritans view the Bible as the 5 books of Moses only, so they do not have anything from Joshua on, the way our Old Testament does, and the way the Tanakh, or the Old Testament for the Jewish people, view. So no prophets, no historical books, no book of Esther, no book of Ruth. Just the Samaritans only view the 5 books of Moses as canonical. For prophets, they have Moses only. Moses is the only prophet, whereas the Jews would have Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, and all the prophets that we're familiar with. Where their holy places, you saw that in John 4. We worship on Mount Gerizim. You Jews worship in Jerusalem or Mount Zion. It's interesting that their tradition even holds that Abraham offered Isaac in Mount Gerizim. And I find that interesting because the Muslim faith holds that Abraham offered Ishmael in Jerusalem. So there's all, that seems to be a battleground for these different sects. Who's going to claim the offering of Abraham, or Abraham's offering, and where was it? So they're all kind of arguing over that. What do they think about the other? As I mentioned, Samaritans believe the Jews are heretics and apostates, that they became corrupted during the Babylonian captivity. They brought back some different weird beliefs, and there are some different weird things that are potentially contradictory with what is in the Torah, that versus what you see in some of the post-exile beliefs. And again, they just didn't like each other. So at one point, they went down to Jerusalem and desecrated the Jewish temple during Jesus' lifetime, about 6 to 10 AD. On the flip side, the Jews believe the Samaritans are heretics and apostates. So yeah, I know you are, but what am I, kind of thing. They became corrupted and even lost during the Assyrian conquest. And then when they repopulated, they became sort of this half Assyrian, half Jewish. So there's a bloodline issue that the Jews would say that the Samaritans are corrupted. Not to be outdone, they desecrated the Samaritan temple as well. So they just don't like each other. What's interesting here, Levirate marriage. So yes, the Samaritans, they keep the 5 books of Moses. So included in that is the Levirate marriage. And what that is if a woman dies, if a husband dies without bearing children, then the brother or the next relative is supposed to marry the widow and carry on the name. And so one possibility is that's what could be happening in John 4. You have had 5 husbands, and the man you have now is not your husband. There's another scene where Tamar is the daughter-in-law of Judah, and she remarries twice. And finally Judah says, "You're kind of bad news. I'm every time one of my sons marries you, they die, and so I'm not going to have my youngest son marry you. We're going to hold off on that." And then there's some shenanigans that happen related to that. So that could be what's going on. It's not that she's a loose woman. It's not that she's she just may be viewed as cursed because she can't bear children, and her first 5 husbands have died. So just think broader than a lot of the stereotypical interpretation is, that she's a woman of loose morals. It never says that in the text. So let's be careful not to read in what isn't there. She mentions in John 4:25 that they expected the Messiah. So they have that in common. There's a lot of similarity, and maybe when you take out the differences and look at what they're excuse me, what they're similar in, there's probably more similarities than differences there. So the name Samaritan, there's the Hebrew word shamar, and that is a verb, means to keep or guard. So that they another sign that they view themselves as the true keepers and guardians of the faith. They believe Jacob's ladder, the dream, occurred on Mount Gerizim. So that's interesting when in John 3, when he references descending and ascending, that's a direct reference to Jacob's ladder and that dream where the angels ascended and descended on the ladder. So there could be something there. Passover, as I mentioned, they keep Passover, but on a different date. And one commentator speculates that the book of John could be written to Samaritans and other non-Jewish groups that follow Israel. So that's why in John 2 he says that the Passover of the Jews, possibly to differentiate between the Passover of other groups, or the Passover of the Samaritans. If you look at Hanukkah, which is referenced in John 10, they call it the Feast of Dedication in winter. That's only could be Hanukkah. Samaritans don't recognize that because they don't recognize anything about Jerusalem. So in John 10, there's no need to say Hanukkah of the Jews. It just says Hanukkah. So again, just some possible hints that the original audience could have been the Samaritans or other groups. This is an interesting slide. It shows just how Judaism of that day was not monolithic. So you can read the different sects there. There's Essene and Qumranite. And what's interesting is they share a lot of their writings show a lot of similarity between like what John the Baptist says. There's just a wicked cabal in running Jerusalem, and these groups want no part of it. And that wicked cabal is the Sadduceic Jerusalem. Um, they're the kind of the power hungry people, and kind of, we would probably view them as corrupt. Although again, you could say that is, there's corruption in there. Does that mean everyone in that sect is corrupt? Probably not. Just like with the Pharisees, does that mean every Pharisee was a hypocrite? Probably not. In fact, among the Pharisee group, there were actually two main groups and probably several splinter groups that they had different beliefs, not entirely unlike our denominations that we have today. So we have all different flavors of Baptists, and they just view things a little bit differently. The zealots, so there's a couple of the disciples that are called zealots, and these were advocated for the militant, violent overthrow of Rome, and they would sneak into a crowd and slit someone's throat, and then sneak out of the crowd, and so they were for the overthrow. Hellenistic Judaism was they wanted to marry the Greek culture with Judaism, and so they were okay with the God of the Bible alongside of the Greek gods and that kind of thing. And then you have Jesus Judaism. Probably of all of these, Jesus would be very much aligned with the Pharisees, and that's why a lot of the commentators think that some of the squabbles, even though they seem heated, they're really more they're like family disputes. We're all one family, but Jesus is saying you guys are just this much off, and here's how you can get right. And there's several Pharisees that come to faith, whereas you have no one mentioned from these other groups ever coming to faith. Samaritans we've talked about. Elephantine Judaism. It's Elephantine Island. Elephantine Island is in Egypt, so there's a tradition there between Abraham being in Egypt, and then even Joseph and Mary going down to Egypt. There's that faith tradition there that they think, well, they came to Egypt and visited here, so we're the true keepers of the faith. You had just people of the land that followed forms of Judaism. Maybe we might say they're maybe a bit heretical in places, and maybe just different beliefs in other places. So, and then of course unknown Judaisms. There could be more that we don't even know about. These are just the ones that we know about. So on that audio, if you don't have time to listen to it, understand it's an hour long, but this is just kind of just some assumptions. That's why I sent it out, and it's worth talking about. So what if the woman at the well was not promiscuous, but instead had a very, very difficult and challenging life, and this causes her to be viewed as an outcast? So don't just assume because all the commentaries say basically the same thing. If you don't see it in Scripture, then you might want to raise a question. That's what Acts 17:11 says. It says the Bereans were more noble than those in Thessalonica. Although they received the teaching, they received the word, they went back and searched the scriptures diligently to confirm and see whether these things were so. So that's Acts 17:11. And then one other question the audio asked: would it really be consistent for Jesus to lay down the hammer of the law and glaringly point out someone's sin when that person was engaged in a genuine conversation? Do we ever see that happen anywhere else? Or did he only reserve that tactic for people who thought they already had the answers? Would it actually be more consistent for Jesus to meet someone where they are with compassion and love, and then gently guide him or her to a deeper understanding? Jesus actually never chides her for evading and changing the subject, even though you see that. And almost every commentary I read says, she was talking about, how she's right and living water and all that. And then Jesus points out, you've had 5 husbands, and then she just changes the subject because she just doesn't want to talk about it. So commentators always say that she's evading. Jesus never says that. Jesus doesn't chide her. He doesn't correct her. He doesn't say, well, let's talk about this man you're living with. He doesn't do that. So just my thought to myself is we need to be careful about putting words in Jesus' mouth and drawing out of the text what actually isn't there. And then it's interesting that what happens is Jesus and the Samaritan woman engage in a very deep spiritual conversation. And this, instead of indicating that she is a woman of loose morals. She could have been really well educated, and it appears she knew what she was talking about, and she was, had a very firm grasp of at least the five books of Moses. And then the other thing the audio points out is, would you or I run into town saying, "Come see this man who told me all of my sin. He told me every sin I ever committed." Would that make me want to go see who that person was? Probably not. I think I might stay away from that one. And then, would a conservative religious community even be inclined to listen to a harlot? So just again, she may be a harlot. We may find that out, on the other side. But it doesn't say that she is, so let's not assume that she is. So anyway, went longer than I wanted to. I'll try and keep these shorter if I do them again. So anyway, hope all this helps. Thanks.